Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Nerds with Friends. My name is Cody Leach. As always, I'm joined by Christian Garcia,
Hello.
and we have a very special return guest. Madeleine Roux, best-selling author, is back to see us again. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to see you guys again and record. It's always a fun time with you too. So
Yeah, we're excited to have you. We're talking about a new book. Uh, we're talking about, we'll get a little bit more into it later. We have a bunch of questions and stuff, but we're talking about what if Loki was worthy, the new Marvel novel that you've written. We're super excited. Loki's one of our favorite characters,
yay.
and we'll get all into that. But before we do that, let's do the standard podcast stuff. Please like and subscribe, follow all the little buttons that all the different platforms ask you to do, and it really helps us out. Also, check out patreon.com/nerds with friends. All the good stuff to support us, support the show. And we like to start the show, as we always do, with some nerdy confessions, where we confess the things that make us nerds. Christian and I will start it off. Christian, why don't you kick off the show with a nerdy confession?
So woke up this morning and I wanted to watch something nostalgic, but also kind of wanted to watch something that I didn't really remember too well. And I remember as a kid loving The Sword and the Stone. I was like, but I don't really remember this movie at all. So I put it on and watched like half of it right now before the interview. And I remember why I loved it as a kid. I still love it as an adult. The music was awesome. The animation style was great. The intro with the books and the pages. Reminds me a lot of Robin Hood, which is one of my favorite Disney movies, with the little rooster coming out with the
Yeah,
mandolin or guitar. Um, and I thought some of the artwork was the same guy who did Dragon's Lair because one of the characters looks like him. I was like, nope. I guess they just just some similarities, but
a lot of those old cartoons look very similar.
yeah.
Everyone was just copying each other, I'm sure. That's one of those movies that I would really like to see, like a live action, remake of. I know Disney's all about making, Lion King and Beauty and the Beast and whatnot. Sword in the Stone was always one of my favorites.
Yeah, but I wanted to stay as goofy with like Merlin. I wouldn't want it to be like
Oh yeah,
serious. Like it would have to be like still playful, where he's shrinking all his books and all this stuff into into his little suitcase and stuff.
yeah. And he's got those like skinny legs. I always remember that for some
Yeah.
reason. It's
Yes.
just he's wearing like his little like wizard's cloak, and then he's got these pale white legs underneath. I love
Yeah.
that in live action. That's so funny.
Like it just looks like he just wrapped a bed sheet around him and stuff, like and the skinny little
Yep,
crap. Yeah. Uh,
absolutely.
yeah, it'd be cool, but I guess like to see it, I'd want it to be as playful and cartoony as it is.
You gotta be. Well, that's a good one. Yeah, I gotta go rewatch that myself. My nerdy confession is I just went and saw the new Dune 2 movie. Dune
Did you
2
get the
Electric.
popcorn bucket?
No, I did not.
They ran out.
I,
Boo.
I thought about it. I was like, oh man, I just don't need another thing in my house.
Yeah.
Another nerdy thing in here. But
But
yeah.
it's also a very specific theater, I think, like that has them. I don't
Oh,
think
they
It's
had it.
only AMC
Yeah,
maybe
I
or
seen it.
something. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, the movie was great. It was, a cinematic, masterpiece. And I think that partially is because there's a lack of movies coming out, but also it was just great. But it really reminds me because I went with my friend Alex, who I had to kind of explain what happens in Dune to him, because never read it or anything. And Dune's a weird book, a weird story. And it made me realize, I'm just not a huge fan of the actual book, but the movies are just so good. I just love them so much. But yeah, I remember reading Dune. I've read it twice now, and I'm just like, ugh. There's too much like weird cerebral, like, oh, am I the chosen one? Am I not the chosen one? Should I manipulate these people? I'm like, man, I just want more sandworms. But the movie's great. Everyone should go see it. Support movies in the movie theaters, and it's definitely a movie to see in the movie theaters as well. It's fantastic. Madeline, how about you? What's the nerdy confession for you?
I haven't seen Dune 2 yet. It is on the list. I do love that book though. It is weird, but that's what I love about it. It's just
Yeah,
like and when you read it, you're like, oh, everything ripped this off. Like
yeah,
every
totally.
every sci-fi thing we love now ripped this off. Got it. I so last weekend was Emerald City Comic Con here in Seattle, and I got to go and be a guest. It was super cool. And I had the incredible pleasure of moderating a panel that had Terry Brooks on it, and some
Ooh,
other great authors too: Catherine Arden, Django Wexler, Peter B. Davis. Oh my God, Sarah L. Reefy. It was awesome. But yeah, Terry Brooks was super cool, such a fun guy. Just a delight to moderate on a panel. He was a goofball. We were sitting next to each other, cracking jokes, and it was a great time. And the signing was great too. I got to give away a bunch of early copies of Loki, and kind of get a temperature read on the buzz for that. So we didn't leave with any. So it seems
nice.
like people are excited. But yeah, it was a great time. We had a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's always cool, when you get to meet, one of your, favorite authors and whatnot. It's very cool because like we've the two of us have gone to Comic Cons enough where, we've met some movie stars and directors and whatnot. But I think, at least to us, authors always seem the most down to earth and most like willing to talk to you about stuff.
For sure.
Um,
Yeah.
you know, like when I met John Favreau, I just cracked a couple of Iron Man jokes and that was kind of the end of it. But I met Brandon Sanderson and what's the other guy's name? I can't think of the top of my head. Oops. But had little conversations and stuff and been able to like talk and chat about books and whatnot. And that's always my favorite thing. So very cool.
Yeah, I think when you exist in a space where like people know who you are, but they don't like know what you look like necessarily, it is very exciting to like get to talk about stuff and get to feel like, oh my gosh, like this person actually knows my work. So yeah, I think authors tend to be the most chill
Yeah.
in terms of that, or like comic book artists and stuff, right? It's like
Oh
kind of
yes.
the unsung heroes of a lot of this stuff. They
Abs
those people tend to be very easygoing.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. Speaking of comic book artists, Todd McFarlane was like one of the most like down to earth dudes ever. I was just like, man, you have such a cool leather jacket. It's like, oh yeah, I love this thing. It was just like,
Yeah,
well,
we were walking around Artist Alley at Emerald City, and some of the artists there are like very well known, like
yeah.
real heavy hitters in the comics industry, and they're just chatting at the table with people, and it's cool to see.
I love it. I love it. Well, let's get into talking about Loki because that's what we're here to talk about anyway. And I'm glad people are scooping them up already because I'll admit I haven't finished it yet, but I've started it and already it's very very cool. And I think Loki is just one of those characters that like is just universally loved, which is why we've seen him so much, I think. Um, so this is What If Loki Was Worthy. Um, is this part of like the What If animated show on Disney Plus, or is this like kind of its own animal, its own beast?
Yeah, so we are kicking off a totally new uh animal. This is our own thing. We get to it's one of the coolest parts of doing this project was that it does exist outside of anything that's going on right now. So
Right.
it's not connected to the MCU, it's not connected to the TV show, it's not connected to the other what if stuff that's going on, which is like pretty rare in IP work. A lot of times you're sort of like promoting something else or it has to hook into something else. And I think that's one of the coolest parts of this book is that it's beginning a new series that is like its own thing. So it has its own lore, its own world building going on. And yeah, it's just a rare opportunity because usually you're sort of like, it's a novelization of something or it's a video game that's coming. So you need to have read 15 other books and played the game for 10 years and, or whatever.
Yeah.
But you could come into this like not really knowing much about, you could have seen one Thor movie or watched, one episode of the Loki show and you would have pretty much all you need to know to start. So yeah, it's really exciting and intimidating in its own its own way to be sort of the first person up to bat, but it's cool. Yeah, no, we're completely unique. So it's its own self-contained story, but then it's also setting up the next few books in the series.
Very cool. So, since it's leading into some other books, how much like control did you have over it? Were you like given the what if prompt and kind of given free reign, or were there certain story beats you had to hit?
Yeah, it's it's different every time you take on one of these projects because sometimes they come to you with like nothing and it's bare bones. It's just like you do it. Sometimes they have a very detailed outline. This was more in that direction where they really had a vision already of not only this first book in terms of like just what they wanted to accomplish, the characters they wanted to focus on, certain elements that had to get set up for the long term. And I knew right off the rip like all the books moving forward who would be in them. So
Okay.
I knew within the first few emails that Peter and Wanda were up next, and then after that it's Venom and Moon Knight. So
Ooh,
um yeah, it's cool. and and then others like beyond that too. Like there's a huge kind of vision, and
very
that
cool.
was encouraging, right? Because it's like I I tend to like coming on to something where okay, you've put a lot of thought into this, and obviously I got to make some pretty cool choices. I got to, have a lot of influence over where it went. But yeah, that was kind of the amount that they came in with. So, like I said, it's just like you never know. You never know what you're gonna get. Sometimes it's like a blank slate, and sometimes it's,
Yeah,
somewhere in the middle. So
that's got to
So I know
be. Oh, go
I
ahead.
know you
Finish.
probably can't like mention too much, but like you mentioned the other characters, are they going to be in like the What If show where there's going to be separate universes, or are they going to be interacting with each other? And I know you can, as much as you
yeah,
can,
yeah, yeah.
not giving.
As much as I can. I think the best way to put it is sort of like these books are building a new Avengers, kind of, right? Like they're building a new lineup to take on the villain that's being kind of threaded through all of the books. So no interaction initially, but ultimately, hopefully, right, if the books do well and there's more of them, you'll see them get to take on the bigger bad that
That's
is sort of
awesome.
the overarching villain. Yeah, so it's really cool. It's almost like every one of these books is like, the origin story of like this new hero that will eventually be part of a lineup.
Right. Yeah, that's very cool. And so like tell me a little bit about like the research you had to do. Like how many Norse mythology names did you have to look up?
Ooh, it was my approach to a lot of these projects, particularly when it's something like this, where there's such a huge amount of content, right, for
Right.
everyone involved. Tony Stark is the villain, so you've got all of his stuff to catch up on. Thor and Loki have an immense amount of content already. Runa, not as much. Valkyrie, she, does not have nearly as much, but has recent comic book runs, which was great because it
Right.
was it was nice to get to read those. But yeah, I mean, my approach was sort of like with any IP thing, it's like take in as much as you can, like
Yeah,
reasonably, Luckily, I was already pretty familiar with a lot of it. But you're going through like the Jason Aaron runs, you're going through, you're reading Peter Gillis and Matt Fraction and Warren Ellis and Bob Layton and all these writers, and I think it's important to respect what's come before and understand it and have like a pretty good knowledge of it, and then you also have to come with your own vision, right? Like
of
just
course.
absorb and take it all in, and then, sit down and ask yourself the question, well, what do I want to do with, Loki? Like what am I interested in looking at? And because I think, some of those really iconic comic book runs that we've seen, the reason they're so good is that it is a new take. It is
Yeah,
a departure. It's something you didn't expect to see. So, I felt very strongly about like, why I have to put my stamp on this. And yeah, so that was the that was the approach, was sort of like, okay, I want to I did also read a ton of Norse mythology, like outside of comic books. I was like, well, they're based on, we're basing a lot of this on actual Norse mythology, so I read a lot of that. I my brother turned me on to this translation of Beowulf by Seamus Heaney that became
ooh,
like a huge inspiration point for it. Um, yeah, watched all the movies again. It's
yeah,
like as much, kind of doing it all. And because it's not, it's not the MCU, it's not anything, right? It's its own
Right.
thing. I just was like, okay, I'm gonna draw from across the board here.
Yeah, that's cool. That in that sense, it kind of gives you a little bit more freedom where you're like, look, it doesn't have to line up with the MCU Loki necessarily, or
Yeah.
the this run of so and so's comic version. It gives you
Yeah.
you can really create your own, and it's in its own alternate universe anyway. So
Yeah, they sort of, when you're doing a what if property, they feel, pretty strongly about like, okay, we don't want it to be super confusing. So there's like a divergence point, but up to that point, everything is canon, right?
right,
So like, it is the Thor story of his background. It is right, like up until this change and the different thing that like makes everything spider,
right,
it has to sort of feel consistent because otherwise it's very confusing, right? If you just
right.
drop in and like the sky is purple and everyone
Yeah,
has six legs, it's like, oh my God, what do we like how did we get here, right? So yeah, it has to feel familiar in order for it to like be more impactful once you get to the point where things, change.
yeah, and I mean, you're definitely no stranger to like, working in someone else's IP because you've done, I think Dungeons and Dragons, Critical Role, World of Warcraft, and then amongst your own stories that you've done. So like, what are some of like the challenges working in someone else's IP? But then what are some of those like things that you really enjoy about it? Because you seem to have done it a lot.
Yeah, it's a different skill in a lot of ways because, there is a canon that you are trying to respect and there is a voice that a lot of these characters already have. And so if you can't really pick up that ball and carry it, or,
Yeah,
if you just don't care, if you don't want anything to resemble what came before, I think this is like maybe not the work for you
right,
because the trick is to, you know, again, be very mindful of what has led up to this point and what has been done and done well. And then to say, okay, how do I, do something creative and do something that's very me while also making this feel like you recognize this Loki, you recognize this Thor, right? Um, and I think, it is scary. I'm not going to lie. There was a little stage fright when you're like, okay, chapter one, Loki's point of view, right? Like,
yeah,
it's scary as scary as shit. Like it gets to you, but you've been hired to do something and you just have to get over yourself. And I do think that just again, all that research, all that sort of just like absorption gives you enough confidence to just be like, no, I know what this is. I know how he would talk. I can like hear it. I can hear it in my head. And you just have to get over it. You just have to get over the sort of stage fright and the crushing weight of, all these juggernauts that are like, like behind you. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think there's like some of the best IP stuff I've experienced is when I feel like you really understand the essence of this thing of like what makes it good, but you also have a very clear point of view and a very, specific idea of where you want to take it.
very cool. Yeah, I think now I've never written a book, not officially anyway. But
Not
like,
yet.
not yet. It's coming. The Tell All Nerds with Friends
Hmm.
biopic. But
I can't wait for you to just excoriate me. Like, I just can't wait for you to be like, God, she's horrible to work with.
yeah, we'll reach out to you with
Yeah,
ideas
spill
for like
all the
casting and
tea.
whatnot. Yeah. The thing that's would strike me about it is like it seems like some of like at least the difficult things about creating a world and whatnot are kind of done for you a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So it's
Hmm.
like, oh, well, now I don't have to, like you said, what these characters sound like. So you like, well, I don't have to like do the hard part of creating something from nothing. I have like the basis for what Loki sounds like or what Odin sounds like or what
Yeah.
have you. So
It's a different challenge in that like, but then there's expectation attached to it,
that's
right? Where
true.
like
Yeah.
I'm about to pitch a fantasy novel of my own world building, and it's like okay, this is hard for a different reason
Right.
because there's so much you have to communicate, but you don't want to overwhelm people. You still want it to be enjoyable and move fast and stuff. But with this, it's like, yes, everyone comes in like knowing who these people are. So in some ways, your work is started for you, but they also are like, oh, well, this is who this person is, right?
Yeah.
So if you deviate too far from that or you can't justify the deviations, I think it's a different type of challenge for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, that's true. I guess you have expectations that you have to kind of at least fall somewhere close within too. So yeah, that's interesting way of looking at it. Now let's talk a little bit about Loki himself, right? I
Sure.
mean, we mentioned everyone loves Loki for some reason. He's been in multiple Marvel movies, both, he's been live action, he's been animated, he's been comics. Now he's in this novel. What do you think makes him such an appealing character? Like, why do we keep going back to Loki?
It's a great question. I think, superheroes, it's so interesting because a superhero now is almost like a god in many ways for us, right? They have these really complex mythologies. We have these ideas attached to them. They're sort of symbolic of things. But then Loki on top of that is actually a Norse god. So there's like cultural attachments to that.
Mm.
There's, a rich history attached to that. And I think it's one of those things where you have, for me, what got me really hooked into this character is thinking about, well, what is he? He's mischievous. He's a prankster. He's sort of this like darker, humored character. Um, but I think where I attached to it was sort of this like idea of the black sheep of the family, right? Where it's like Thor is the golden child. He can kind of do no wrong in a lot of senses, and Loki is just sort of the one that everyone is like, oh, okay, here he comes. Yeah, like when
Yeah,
he rolls up to the family barbecue, you're like, oh God, like
right.
what's gonna happen now, right? And there are like literal Norse stories like in the mythology about that, right? Of him showing up to feasts and just making a complete ass of himself, right? And just
Yeah,
causing a bunch of problems. So I was like, okay, I think this is my way in. And I think this is actually what a lot of people identify with is this sense of being like misunderstood, like not always doing the right thing, not always like understanding what the right thing is to do in any given situation, but like your heart is often in the right place. Or, his heart is not in the right place for reasons that are very relatable, right? That like he's kind of an outcast, his family, he's not the favorite one in the family, and all of those things are very like damaging to you as a person, right? To
yeah,
be thought of as sort of the outsider in the family. And I was just thinking like, well, what would 1,000 years of that do to someone, of being the
right.
letdown, of being the person no one wants at the family function, like the person who everyone's kind of like rolling their eyes at all the time. And that was like a huge jumping off point for like what I wanted to do with this character, was to be like, okay, if you have this golden sibling and then they're gone and you're the screw up and also you're partially responsible for them being gone now, the way that would change the family dynamic, like is there something there, can we have him go on his journey to worthiness by sort of like examining the way that he's failed himself, the family has failed him, like Ragnarok and mythology at large has sort of, put him in this box. And, what happens if you have a little kid and you point at them and say, hey, you're the god of mischief? Like,
Yeah,
well, who, like, that's going to make you into something. Even if you like it, even if you enjoy it, there is like, those labels can be very impactful. So, I really wanted when you're dealing with these larger than life characters. I'm always very mindful of like, how do we relate to this though? Like, how do we get into this? How do we as humans who don't have superpowers, like, where is the connection point there? So, my personal interest in Loki and what I hope people like about him is this sort of sense of like, not necessarily an underdog, but, the outcast, the black sheep. And I think that's a very relatable feeling to sort of be like the child in the family who maybe like, you know, isn't a CEO or like,
yeah,
as the like working artist of my family, I've had hard times. I've had moments where it looked like, oh, she's not gonna make it. Like, is she okay? So that was, yeah, that was kind of the way I tried to get into his character and make it feel relatable.
Very
Just
cool.
hearing you describe all that, I was like, I didn't know how much I had in common with Loki. It's just
So
like,
that's what I'm trying. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, right? Like, I mean, there's obviously like a very personal aspect to this book. It is was written very quickly after I lost my brother. He died very suddenly and tragically, and then I had a meeting to do this book like weeks after he
Wow.
passed, and I went into that meeting being like, I don't think I'm going to do this. Like, this is probably not the right choice for me right now. And but I also went into that meeting being like, hey, look, this is where I'm at. Like, this just happened. It
Yeah.
is very fresh. It is very intense. And I want to do these things in this book. Like, I won't do it if I can't like make it personal in these ways and make it very like emotionally grounded. And they were super great and super understanding and really supportive, honestly, of like all the all the ways that I wanted to sort of hook in my like personal situation that was unfolding at the time. But I was just sort of like uniquely positioned to do this project like at that moment where you are like, oh, okay, the main character has just like lost their sibling. So have I. I am very familiar with like the way that bomb just goes off, right?
Right.
And all the ways the family starts to change, all the ways that our worst and best qualities come out in a situation like that. So, yeah, I was really interested in sort of doing this like a very human examination of okay, Thor dies, that's a bomb going off. The shrapnel's going to fly in every direction.
Right.
How does every person close to him or affected by his death, like how do these people react? And that's where the conflict comes from, right? Is like everyone's reaction is different and that's what creates the obstacles.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I mean, bringing that up too, you just have such a unique perspective on it. And like at the end of the day, I think that's one of the things that I really enjoy about the Thor Loki dynamic is like the brother aspect of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of those things that's really made those two characters like we just love seeing them together at all times. And why, yes, Loki's always poking at Thor and trying to, get a rile out of him and whatnot. But, at the end of the day, they still are brothers and they still, love each other in their own way,
Yeah.
kind of thing. So very cool. Um, Now Loki has, had this like rich history in comic books, right? All the way back in the original Avengers comic books. Um, Now, were there any unique challenges bringing him into just solid prose rather than
Mm.
having kind of that visual medium to, hold him up?
It's a really good question. Yeah, I think there always is because comic books are like so dynamic, right? You have
Sure.
so much of the storytelling and so much of the work is being done by the artist. So it is a challenge because, you know, would get very self-aware of like it's too slow. Like we need like there has to be another like action sequence. We need more action. We need more stuff happening. And I think that was like a trap because it's not a comic book, right?
Yeah.
It's a prose novel. So like people are coming to it expecting a book. So you just have to like kind of let that stuff go and, rely on the craft and the technique that you already know and have, right? And just, if something needs to be described, it needs to be described. But you sort of have the advantage of like, well, everybody sort of has an idea of like what these people look like and it's almost not worth fighting it to some extent, right? Like
Yeah.
Jane Foster is in this book quite a lot, and it's like I'm not going to fight what everyone has in their head, right? Like
Yeah.
we all are kind of picturing Natalie Portman, probably, right? Like maybe
Constantly.
not, maybe you're more picturing like her from the Jason Aaron run, but like it's probably in that realm. So I'm
Sure.
not going to go out of my way to be like, no, actually, in this she has like orange hair and, and
Yeah.
purple eyes. I don't think they'd let me anyway, but like, you know what I mean? It's like, don't fight it. Just embrace the fact that like you kind of have a leg up in some of this stuff. And, um, Yeah, I mean that was sort of the approach, right? Is like if there's new characters, obviously I had to do a little more
Yeah,
legwork there to introduce what they look like, and yeah, you're just sort of reminding people at certain points where it feels natural, where it feels important, or like if there's a departure, right? Like eventually he is worthy. I don't think that's a spoiler.
right.
I think, eventually he is wielding Mjolnir, and I was very invested in like, well, I don't think he would look the same.
Yeah,
Like I don't think if I picked it up, I wouldn't look the same. So like he wouldn't either, right? Like every time we see like, someone else pick it up, there's sort of this transformation moment. So
right.
I was like, well, then I have to describe that because that's something new and something that's only in my head. But yeah, I mean, I just think I think at a certain point I had to let go that it's not a comic book. And yes, there are action sequences. Don't get me wrong. We've still got the big boom booms in this, but it's a book and it's character driven. And at the end of the day, like, just have to keep the focus there.
Yeah. I think, this I don't think this gives anything away because like the first chapter, but I think how you handled the Watcher, or maybe a Watcher,
Mm-hmm.
and how they interact with the multiverse, and like, I thought that reading it in prose was so much more interesting than just like, some bald alien looking, through
It
a
was
window
that
at
was tough
something.
too. You're like, because when you've seen it depicted, you're like, what am I gonna do? Like, how
Yeah.
do I describe this? It's so surreal. It's like I was like, I think we have to go with like vibes, right? Like
Yeah.
we have to conjure a feeling. We have to conjure more of a moment rather than like it's a big bald-headed purple person. Like,
Yeah.
and there's, it just doesn't work the same way. Like something like that, I think is, I actually think that's one of the things that makes Dune very difficult at points when you're
Yeah.
like, I'm sorry, they're what? Like they're like fish people? What? Like where did this come from? I'm sorry, there's like a six-legged guy crawling around, right? Like so yeah, I think it was just more of a matter of like, how can I conjure the correct like environment, the right feeling for this rather than like a very regimented thing. And also because the Watcher sort of goes on their own journey in this, and ultimately we find out like a lot about this particular Watcher. I was like, I have to keep the focus here on like them as a character rather
Yeah.
than um describing to a T this like bulbous headed creature.
Yeah, I think, I think that actually is one of those like highlights of prose is like you can do a little bit more internal monologue, and what the feelings and vibes are. And that just like if you're looking at that in a comic book or you're watching that on a TV screen, you're like, what's happening? They're just standing there. I don't understand.
Right.
But
Right. And it's also exciting to think about like, okay, well, if this was a comic book and I handed this off, like what would come back, right? Like what would the
yeah,
art look like? So yeah, for me it was much more about like, okay, this is kind of cerebral, this is kind of surreal. I just have to get you there in terms of like, I think the Watcher stuff will be the hardest element for people who aren't like deeply into the
sure.
Marvel stuff, right? It's a
It's a
very
weird
unique,
concept.
weird concept. Yeah, it's very strange. It's very disorienting. Like I think my mom will probably struggle with that, but um, yeah, it's just for me, it was like, okay, well, this character goes on a journey too, and so let's just let's keep it there. Let's keep it about the vibes, and people will conjure the image they conjure, and that's okay.
Of course, yeah. So I think that's one of the great things about just reading in general is like my, Loki, my Paul Atreides, my whoever looks different than anyone else's. And maybe, that's one of those things where like when we picture a Watcher, they're going to have a larger head, but besides that, it could kind of be anything.
Yeah.
So now that we've talked a little bit about Loki, like if you had the opportunity to do any what if scenario, any character from the Marvel universe, comics, movies, shows, what have you, like what would be your next one if you had unlimited access to their whole library? And then I have
Um,
I have one too. Hopefully Christian's thought up one as well.
I kind of have two. So one of them I got to do very briefly. She's in this like very, very briefly, but Jen Walters is She-Hulk is in this
Oh,
book.
nice.
She has a little kind of a cameo appearance, and I don't know, I just like connected to her on a spiritual. I just like it was like channeling. Like I was like, she's here, she's with
Yeah.
me, and it was so fun. It's honestly probably some of the most fun I had in the book was writing her dialogue. I would love to do She-Hulk. That would be sick. I'd also, I know this is X-Men, but I've always been a Dazzler fan.
Oh,
I
yeah.
don't think she gets enough love. I would love to do something with Dazzler.
Yeah, I think that would be a cool. Hey, the X-Men are going to come back eventually here,
I
so
know, I
we're
know.
set. Hopefully Dazzler and hopefully Jubilee gets her own.
Yes, Jubilee's great too. I mean, honestly, almost any of the X-Men would be rad.
Oh
I
yeah.
that was like I grew up on those cartoons and those comic books, so I would absolutely love to do something with the X-Men. But I do feel pretty spoiled that
Oh yeah.
I got to do this book
Of
and that,
course.
I got to choose the villain. I got to make Tony Stark the villain. I got to, get Jen Walters in there because I just had to. But yeah, no, I feel quite lucky, chapter prologue watcher, chapter 1 Loki, chapter 2 Thor, like
Yeah.
it kind of doesn't get
Incredible.
chapter 3 Tony Stark. Like it kind of doesn't get much better than that,
Yeah,
honestly.
exactly. Just kind of picked all the best ones out of there anyway.
Um,
I think one for me, and they kind of have hinted at this in maybe some Ultimate type comics and whatnot, but Captain America has always been one of my favorite characters in Marvel comics and the movies and everything else. But I always thought it would be really interesting to see him in a different war than World War II, one where maybe there's not
mm,
as, much of a, righteous backing from the United States. Like Vietnam, I think would be a very interesting way of kind of looking at that character and like how his ties to America and how his ties to, his government and whatnot would be tested during that situation. I think that would be cool. And like that's kind of what the Punisher did already, but in fact, I think at a couple of times, Punisher has like mentioned that you know, he's like Captain America born, 30, 40 years too late kind of thing. But I think it would be interesting to see how Steve Rogers kind of reacts to something like that. But
Yeah, I feel like modernizing, I mean, that's, I'm setting this in like what feels like today, right?
sure.
Like I reference modern restaurants, I reference modern cultural things, and, you know, it stands up pretty easily to that. But yeah, there are characters who feel so tied to their period that they're in. I think that's like a fantastic idea, right? I think it's obviously very you'd really need a deft hand to
Yeah.
handle that. I don't know that they would want to wade into that kind of controversy. But yeah, I mean, some of the most fun I had with this book was writing Tony because it's just like, well, I've watched a really unsettling amount of The Real Housewives, and I am fascinated by the ghoulish, absurd lives of rich people. So I
Sure.
like just getting to go full American Psycho with him was such a pleasure. And really, I felt like those were the days I was like excited to sit down to work because I was like, yes, it's a Tony day. I get to be my most unhinged, like sociopathic, indulgent self. Let's go.
Yeah, I just got American Psycho on in the background, talking about the
Yeah.
business cards.
I actually pulled a lot of inspiration from him from the book. That book is 1,000 times worse than the movie. It's surely like will turn your stomach. I can't really even recommend it in good conscience, but it's like, it's great. It's a work of art. But yeah, I drew a lot of it. And Succession, I just finished watching Succession. So if you're familiar with that show, there is a lot of Kendall Roy in this
Gotcha.
vision of Tony. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't finished Succession. I got like halfway through the first season, and it's one of those shows I had to kind of take a break from. You kind of
Sure.
like just like Breaking Bad. Every once in a while, you got to sit
Yeah.
down and be like, I
There's
just
no
can't.
heroes on that show. They're all
Yeah,
terrible. They're all
I just can't
terrible.
watch
Yeah.
people ruin their lives that
Yeah.
much for that long. So it's nice to
Yeah.
take a
It
little
just,
break.
with the way that show wraps up, it just felt like the perfect sort of like just that really like soulless, weird, empty corpo speak that you're like, what are you saying? Like, those aren't real things. You're just saying words and you're saying them so confidently that like you believe they mean something, but the
Right.
rest of us are completely lost. But yeah, I just would like I would just like watch episodes of it and just like take notes about the way people talked. I was like, this is I have to like channel this for Tony and Pepper.
Yeah,
Like this is the world that they inhabit, just like yeah, you just take a helicopter anywhere. Like in
right.
10 minutes, sure, right? So that's the level of wealth that you're talking about. And as a person who is not rich, it was like I need to really immerse myself in these people's lives.
There you go. Christian, how about you? What's a what if that you'd like to see?
So before that, I just want to say, like, it seems like it would be very easy to turn Tony evil.
Yeah,
Like, it does seem like it would be a very
Well,
like,
he sure is. He's sure pretty bad in this. But I mean, he has an arc. It was not like we want him to just be irredeemable, but and hopefully it feels very like relatable and very earned. But I would describe it like if you remember the first 15 minutes of Iron Man when it's just a montage of what a horrible dirtbag he is. It's like
yeah,
that, but for an hour and 15 minutes, and then you get like 20 minutes of him post cave, sort of like a fully realized boy. So,
yeah.
um, yeah, it's a lot of Tony being a pretty sad person
It's
for a
almost
lot of this movie.
surprising that he became a hero at all. You know what I
Yes,
mean?
I mean that's like it was exactly my approach. Was like this is what a crossroads. He could have gone so different.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, so that was a really cool what ify thing to get to do. Was like, okay, what if he never has you know, his revelation that he's a terrible human being.
yeah,
He just spirals.
yeah. He just goes in, doubles down on it.
Right, and someone with that kind of power and access and
Oh
and
yeah,
resources, right? It's like the spiral is pretty dangerous when that happens.
100%. All right, Christian, what you got?
so my normal go-to answers would be Spider-Man and
You love
Doctor
love
Strange.
Spider-Man, Doctor Strange,
They're my two favorite, but
Spider Supreme. They've already done it.
yeah.
Come up with a
uh,
new one.
So my choice would be Hercules, who he's
Ooh,
never really had too much of a huge run in the comics. I'm super happy that they, hinted at him, in the last Thor movie we got. So I'm excited that he's going to be on the big screen. I don't know how they're going to portray him, but I would love to see. There was an arc after World War Hulk where during the Skrull invasion, there was the superheroes fighting on Earth, but then there was also Earth gods fighting the squirrel gods. And I would love to see, I mean, obviously we know how it turns out, they win, but like to see an alternative version of like where they don't and where it's focused on Herc. That would be something that I would love to see. Um, yeah, I just don't know like if people would be ready to see us lose.
yeah,
Like, but if it's a what if, it doesn't really matter too much.
See, I that's the stuff I want, right? Like I want big swings like that because I think that's really when you get to dig down into these characters and see if they can stand up to it, right? To see if like is it still interesting if you really like push these ideas kind of to their most extreme.
yeah. I think part of the fun of, and I think why the What If series, from its comic book origins to its TV shows to now these books, I think is like part of the fun of it is sure, like having someone, kill off Thor, early on is just like that. We can't do that in a comic because we've got comic books to sell, or they have to come back somehow, as they always seem to do in the comic books, right? But like these, you can take those big swings and you can make these things that like we would never get away with this in a movie that we release or a TV show or what have you. But it gives you that access to like what would happen if this happened. And I think that's why this speaks to the longevity of that what if name, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean it's been going on for decades now, in different iterations, and people still just like ooh thinking up new ones. And I think that's part of the fun is like constantly think
Yeah.
like I would have never thought of Loki picking up Mjolnir, or some of those other combos that you mentioned, like a Venom Moon Knight. I have no idea what that would be like, but I'm down to find out.
Yeah, and I think like, these huge sprawling properties like Marvel and, Star Wars DC, it's like canon becomes such a thing, right? And so characters get put into these lanes that they like can't deviate from,
Right.
but like there are other characters that they would in the natural way of things never encounter, right? But
Right.
they are would be so good against or would have such an interesting compelling relationship with them, right? So it's like it gives you the opportunity to like play a little more and do things that are improbable and set things up in a way that's like, hey, yes, the canon exists and that's always going to be what people go back to, right? That's always going to kind of be the like the pillar that holds all this stuff up. But like I don't know, it's cool to think about, right? Like I think it's a lot of what drives people to like write fan fiction and stuff. You're like,
Yeah.
hey, there's other stuff to imagine here. There's like cool opportunities for something exciting and out of the box. And it sort of indulges that side, right? Of our sort of like, oh, well, I would have had this go differently, or I would have done this, and that's how I got into writing, right? You like watch a movie or read a book and you're like, well, I hate that ending.
Yeah.
I'm gonna do it differently, right? So like why'd they have to kill that person off? That person was cool. I mean, think about like Boba Fett. That's like Boba Fett is the like what if princess of all princesses, right? Because it's
100%.
like he died, y'all. He was gone. And then they were like, oh, but he looks so cool. We put so much effort into that armor.
I
He seemed
know.
like such an interesting, mysterious guy to kill him off that way. No, like, no, let's just bring him back, right? It's like, that's a what if. Like, no, he was gone. Like, let's be honest with
Yeah.
ourselves. Like, he
Yeah.
was
Boba
really
Fett
gone.
sucks. Everyone knows he sucks. Like he got hit by a blind guy and he fell into the pit with a worm in it, right? Also taken
But
from Dune.
yeah, yeah. See, yes, everything comes from Dune. So yeah, I mean, I think like it's silly to pretend that we don't all have those sorts
Yeah.
of things, right? How many people walked out of those newer Star Wars movies like you can't just like kill off Phasma, she didn't do anything, right? Like, where's her thing? And they obviously like wrote a book about her, but I just think there's a lot of that, right? There's a lot of these sort of threads that get cut too soon, or
Yeah.
things you wish you could go back and do differently, and that's what this exists for. It's like an experiment, and it's playful, and um yeah, I mean, I had a blast. So
What if Ned Stark just like tucked and rolled out and didn't get his
right.
head cut off and then
What if
saved,
Joffrey got up
saved
on the right side of the bed that day? Right?
yeah.
Like, what if he had a good sleep and a snack and a juice box, and then he didn't, make
Yeah.
a rash decision that ruined everyone's lives.
Yeah. It could still happen. Winds of Winter isn't out yet, so it could still something could turn around. He comes back
I'm
as a ghost or a White Walker. We don't know.
not gonna crush your dreams on this. I'm gonna like let you keep the hope alive.
It's the ultimate what if,
It's
What
yeah.
if?
What if the book
What
gets finished?
what
Like,
if he sat down and wrote? Yeah, it's a
Yeah,
great question.
exactly.
What would
It's
happen?
all up in the air. It could be anything,
It could be
it's just
anything.
nebulous. Well, I'm super excited to read the rest of this book. And so I think it's coming out, correct me if I'm wrong, April 2nd, right?
Yes, April 2nd. Yep.
April 2nd, wherever books are
Everywhere.
sold and traded
Hmm.
and given. Yeah, I think it's going to be very exciting to find out. And like, this sounds like a cool series. I knew quite a bit about this book going in, obviously preparing to talk to you, but hearing about some of the future plans and stuff makes it's very exciting. So,
Yeah, I got to write a little stinger. We actually
well,
were
after
like
credit
very
scene.
yes, we were very playful about it in that it's like even after like the author's note and everything, like we put it like genuinely at the very end of the book. So there's a little, teaser for the next book coming up.
Oh, that's so awesome. I love
and then
it.
if you scratch on the last hardback of the page, you peel back, there's
You
more.
peel back, and there's a map for a treasure on the back of the Constitution.
Oh, I wish. I wish. No, I tried to be pretty sly about because I have to set up sort of the overarching villain, but not give away who it is.
Yeah,
And I think I did a pretty good job putting some little breadcrumbs in there. So
nice. Now there's
the
going to be all the
very
theory videos and stuff in reaction, and like,
yeah, the very observant, very close readers will probably figure it out fairly quickly, but I think the average person will be like, "Huh, I don't know. We'll see."
yeah, and those are the best when you're like, oh, I'm intrigued and I want to find out more, and you just have to wait till next time.
Yeah, I stumped a pretty big Marvel fan, so I think you'd have to be really really deep into it to figure it out just from this book. So
Awesome. Well, that's so cool. Well, thank you so much for coming and talking to us. We always enjoy having you on. And then, I know you have other books coming out, you said as well. So we're happy to talk not Marvel stuff too, whenever you're free.
yeah, yeah, I've got this coming out in April, and then in May I have the third book in my D&D series for kids. That'll be out, wrapping up that series. And then in August I have a romance novel coming out. So packed schedule for
Very fun.
this
Yeah,
year.
you're going to be
Yeah.
busy.
And all
Signing
over the
books.
map. Yeah,
Yeah.
kids fantasy, adult sci-fi, and adult romance. So a
Yeah.
little bit of everything.
Wow. Pick a genre, you
Yeah,
like doing
I can't
everything.
do it. I can't do it. The ADHD won't let me do it. I'm sorry. It's out
Very
of my
cool.
control.
Absolutely. Well, thank us again for coming on and talking to us. It's always a pleasure. And everyone check out What If Marvel or What If Loki Was Worthy in stores on April 2nd. Get yourself a
Yay.
copy. And then make sure to like and subscribe to this podcast. It helps us out. We just do this because we love talking nerdy stuff with our nerdy friends. So helps us out. Check out patreon.com/nerds with friends. Madeline, thanks again so much. Christian, thanks as always for being the
See,
Thor to my Loki. I mean, if there's a Thor in this relationship, I got to imagine it's me, right?
sure.
You're kind of the artist, the whimsical, mischievous guy. But thank you again, and to all the nerds out there, remember, you're not alone. You're with friends. This is Nerds with Friends. Thank you, and good night.